All right, everybody, welcome to Section 2 of Introduction to Criminal Justice. I know you're all really happy to be here, but today, in Section 2, we're going to give you a very, very brief introduction to criminological theory, okay? So, criminological theory, if you are a criminal justice major, you are going to take an entire course just on this section, okay? So imagine an entire semester just for this section. But it's an incredibly interesting thing. It's really where criminal justice kind of started, where it kind of came from, how it began in sociology, as I talked about in the previous section. So, because this is a new section, you get a new funny picture of the day. If you don't get that joke, you need to go watch The Dark Knight. It is by far the best Batman movie ever made. And as we all know, Batman is the greatest detective of all time. So, criminology is essentially an entire field where all they talk about is, why do people commit crime? Why do people commit crime? I mean, have you ever really thought about it? What makes somebody either law-abiding or a minor criminal or a major criminal? Like, what is it about us or about those other people that make them shoplift or commit robbery or all the way up to murder, right? What is the difference between the law-abiding citizens, which I hope you all are, and the criminals? So think about it for 1 second. Just sit there and think about what's the difference? What makes them criminal and you not criminal? I wish I had the soundtrack for the Jeopardy theme. But, okay, so now that you have an idea in your head, we need to talk about the concept of theory, okay? Now in science, a theory is vastly different than kind of how that word theory is used in just common nomenclature, right? If we're just having a conversation about, you know, who stole a cookie from the cookie jar, and I say, well, I got a theory. In that case, I'm using the theory more like scientists use the word hypothesis, right? A hypothesis is essentially kind of an educated guess, okay? And in normal conversation, people use theory to mean kind of educated guess, right? Well, in science, a theory is an explanation for some observed phenomenon that is supported by evidence, okay? So it takes a lot to become a theory. And there are some famous theories out there. Electromagnetism, that's a theory. Gravity, that's a theory. Atomic theory, germ theory, evolution, probably the most controversial theory, right? But those are all theories. There is some observed phenomenon, and some scientist or a group of scientists came up with a theory to try to explain why we see what we see, okay? In criminology, we have a bunch of different theories, okay? A lot of them have been shown to be, you know, there's lots of evidence against them. Others, there's mixed evidence. Others, the evidence really varies a lot depending on the kind of theory we're talking about, the type of theory we're talking about, and we will go through a little bit of that today. But you need to remember that just because you learn about a theory and you say, oh wow, yeah, okay, so that's what causes crime. Just because whatever that is that the theory says causes crime is present in some individual, whether it's you or a family member or somebody you know, does not mean they're going to become a criminal. Even the best theories can't explain the criminality of everybody, okay? So just because you have or your friend has whatever thing that a certain theory says causes someone to become a criminal doesn't mean that you or they or whoever is going to become a criminal, okay? This is probabilistic, not definite, all right? So, prior to the Enlightenment, there were a lot of non-scientific theories about what causes crime, okay? Essentially, these were everything from religious to just spiritual, just whatever essentially the devil made him do it, or whatever, gods were in the pantheon that were evil, like Loki in the Norse pantheon. Oh, well, Loki must have had something to do with that, right? Um, and, I'm not trying to speak ill of religion or anything. If you're religious, God bless you. But they're not exactly scientific theories, okay? Saying the devil made me do it, or the devil possessed me, or a spirit possessed me, or whatever, not exactly scientific. But then, during the Enlightenment, along comes this guy named Beccaria, okay? And Beccaria comes up with the first kind of attempting to be logical theory about why people commit crime, okay? And he based it on this earlier philosophical thing by a guy named Bentham, who lived at the same time. And Bentham came up with utilitarianism, okay? If anybody's taken the Intro to Philosophy class, you've heard of utilitarianism. Utilitarianism basically says that which is good is that which brings the most pleasure to the most people, okay? So any philosophical conundrum you're trying to deal with, right, you should make the choice that brings the most pleasure to the most people. That's utilitarianism by this guy named Bentham, right? So Beccaria reads this and he says, you know what? I want to apply that to criminology. I want to apply that to why people choose to commit crime. So he says, okay, with every decision that people make, whether to commit crime or not, they weigh the pain and the pleasure, okay? The possible pain and the possible pleasure, okay? So if I'm going to go, I'm, standing in front of 7-Eleven, and I say, am I going to rob that 7-Eleven? Well, what are the possible pleasures of robbing that 7-Eleven, okay? The obvious one is the money. I'm going to get a bunch of money, right? I'm going to get an adrenaline high. I'm going to get treated like a big guy, who's big man on campus because I got to rob the thing, right? But then what are the possible pains? Well, I could be arrested. The clerk could shoot me. I could go to prison, right? So I'm going to weigh that pleasure and pain, and whichever one is more, is higher, is better, that's the side that I'm going to choose to do. So if the pleasures of committing crime outweigh the pains of committing crime, I'm going to commit that crime, right? Does that make sense? In other words, crime is a rational choice. Thus, we call this rational choice theory, okay? So in essence, it assumes A, that people are rational, and B, people choose whether to commit crime, weighing the good and the bad of committing that crime. Now, Beccaria went further and he said, all right, if we want to reduce crime, if we want to prevent crime, we need to do three things, okay? These are very important. If we want to reduce crime, we need to make sure our punishment is certain, swift, and severe. Okay? So you want to prevent crime, you make sure punishment is certain, i.e., every time you commit that crime, you are going to be punished for it. Okay? We need to make sure it's swift, i.e., every time you commit that crime, we need to make sure the punishment follows closely with the crime, because that's the only way people are going to link it in their heads, crime, punishment, right? And then third, the crime needs to be severe, but not too severe. Beccaria was actually totally against the death penalty. He thought the death penalty was way too far. But it needs to be severe enough to make the pain part of that equation outweigh the pleasure part, okay? So you can't just say, oh, you committed an armed robbery, we're going to fine you $10, right? You can have a certain punishment and a swift punishment, but if it's, a fine of $10 for committing an armed robbery, people are still going to commit the armed robberies, right? So this basic fundamental rational choice theory, it's also called deterrence theory, is the foundation of modern American jurisprudence, right? Our entire criminal justice system in the United States is based on this concept of we need to make sure punishments are certain, swift, and severe so that people will be deterred from committing crime, okay? Now, Beccaria said that we should not take mitigating circumstances into account. He said, stealing a loaf of bread should face the exact same punishment, whether you're stealing it because you feel like stealing it, and whether you're stealing it because you're starving to death. He thought that those kind of the situation, the context of why you committed that crime should not be taken into account. Later, classical school theorists said, no, we probably should take that into account because we really shouldn't punish somebody who's stealing food to feed a starving child the same way we would punish somebody who steals food just because they wanted to steal something, right? So this rational choice theory is really, really, really the basis of what we think of as justice today, okay? So when we come back next time, we're going to talk about some other early theories of crime. But until then, I will see you next time.